We're at 722 North Elm Drive. Reported double homicide. Present at the scene are Detectives Zoller, myself, and Lenahan.
So, I've seen the trailer to a Netflix series called Monsters, based on the story of Lyle and Erik Menendez. Some of the choices they made were absurd and completely bizarre. I watched the first 30 seconds of the first episode and saw how they portrayed Lyle as some explosive, unhinged psychopath, and I just said nope and shut it right back off.
I have only watched the first episode of the show, which was outrageous. The playing a song at the funeral, I mean, come on. I appreciate poetic license, but that is beyond the pale. The portrayal of Lyle as this rage-fueled, fly-off-the-handle, aggressive personality, is so far off the mark of his personality. In fact, when I spoke to Lyle the other night, I said to him, I don't actually think I've ever heard you raise your voice. And he was like, yeah, I don't do that. Like, he really, that's not accurate.
That portrayal of Lyle is so far off the mark, it goes beyond creative license into pure deception and deliberate slander. I personally felt annoyed by this because years ago I did a very special video where I broke down how Lyle was not a psychopath or a sociopath, and how it was his very empathy for his brother that drove him to do what he did to his parents.
And he was very rough with Erik. Erik just sort of tried to get involved a lot, and that would really upset my dad.
Erik wanted your dad's attention?
He wanted to be part of what was going on. And he would just wander into the conversations. He would just wander into the conversations. And sometimes my dad, I remember one time that he was in the black chair and I was by the coffee table and we were doing something, and my brother sort of just wandered into the area and my dad just hit him across the face, and my brother just went flying into the rug. And his whole face was bruised.
What was wrong with Erik? Did your dad say? Would he say things to Erik? What was wrong with him?
No, they would just tell him to shut up and go away. And why can't you just shut up and go away? And my brother would just he'd just stand there. And my dad would have to push him away, or he would hit him. He was being a little too harsh with Erik, who just sat there with. My brother just couldn't respond. Just sat there, sort of stunned, helpless.
He did it out of protecting and defending the person he loved most in the world. And that, no matter how grisly the crime scene was, is an admirable attribute of his character. Noble even. So it pains me that so many other people can't see how much of an unsung hero he was, and still is. Lyle is still suffering the consequences for what he sacrificed to protect his brother to this day, over 30 years later. I can't believe people are still taking every opportunity to rehash the story and still coming to the same conclusion, where they demonize them unfairly over and over again. And there is nothing fair about the portrayal of the boys in this series, particularly Lyle, and I don't care if the justification behind it was that they were trying to include multiple perspectives. Here's why that's a problem. And at first, I didn't know how to feel about the framing of the story in this show. I thought it was likely going to be yet another hit piece that demonized the boys and paid little attention to the abuse that led them to do what they did. I mean, we're used to this. There have been multiple books and stories that have done this. Ultimately, the show was another exploitative pander session, in my opinion, trying to appease all sides and all perspectives, as if all perspectives on this case bore the same gravity and weight, which they don't. The only perspectives that matter in this case are the Menendez brothers, who were driven to kill their parents for some reason, and also the perspectives of the countless eyewitnesses who knew the parents firsthand at all different ages of these boys' lives, some of whom the boys hadn't seen or spoken to for years before they showed up to defend them on that stand. This strange approach that the showrunners chose is evident in clips and reviews that I've seen, and it didn't sit well with me or many other people. Commenters on IG and YouTube are fired up, and they have sounded off on the matter and don't seem to be too pleased with this portrayal in the least. And they felt like the show creators had ill intentions, and I can't blame them. The show apparently made a point to show multiple POVs, thereby presenting them all as plausible when they're simply not. Only one perspective on the matter is supported by evidence. That would be the Menendez brothers' testimony. By presenting other fabricated and unsubstantiated characterizations of the details in this case, and the boys' personalities in particular, the show creators undermined the significance of the abuse testimony and the well-documented evidence of abuse, which ranges from medical records to photos of them nude as children, to antisocial behavior as they were growing up, to performing below average in school and exhibiting severe learning disabilities, such as an inability to write or speak, as well as a written letter from Erik to his cousin before the killings, and much, much more, as well as the numerous eyewitnesses to their abuse through the years who testified in the 1993 trial on their behalf, including the siblings of the very people they killed. They testified on behalf of the boys because they knew what had driven them to do what they did. This means that in choosing to lend credence to all POVs on this case, the show creators prioritized entertainment value and profit over incontrovertible, well-documented truth. The show also made a point to present the perspective that the boys may have been the real monsters themselves, and that their abuse testimony was all an elaborate ruse curated by their defense team. The same nonsense we've heard time and time again, which is totally contrary to all available evidence, even many prosecution witnesses. Still, at certain points in the show, the creators chose to portray the brothers as heartless, greedy psychopaths who killed for money. With that being said, here are the topmost disturbing facts about the real Menendez brothers story that I hope are mentioned, or at least are alluded to, in this new documentary airing on October 7th, which will feature, for the first time in 30 years, Erik and Lyle Menendez speaking for themselves directly from prison and telling their story on the largest platform yet. I hate that Netflix will profit from the brothers yet again after what they did to hurt their credibility in the dramatized series, but it's only fitting that they provide them the opportunity to speak for themselves after that travesty of a show aired to millions. And side note, for a detailed breakdown of the following information in this video, Please be sure to check out my comprehensive 8-part series on the Menendez Brothers' tragic case in the playlist linked in the description below. I meticulously go through a lot of evidence revealed in that first trial in 1993 for those who don't want to sit through hours and hours of footage on court TV. Again, the playlist will be linked below.
What we felt was unusual behavior by we, I'm talking about the crew member and my guest, was that the son stayed at the front of the boat during the whole charter, the bow of the boat, and it was a very choppy, wet day. And upon leaving Marina Del Rey, we actually took a wave over the front of the boat that soaked him. And we were on top of the fly bridge, of course, and didn't get wet, and yet we were still cold, and I believe they were wearing shorts. And we couldn't understand why they were staying up there freezing.
So they were not dressed for wet or cold weather, I take it?
No.
Did they appear to be comfortable, or did they appear to be uncomfortable?
They appeared uncomfortable.
And did you tell Detective Zoller about that as well?
Yes, I did. They appeared to be very cold and shivering, and so they were very close to each other and right below us, sitting on the bridge of the boat.
You often hear this part of the story. On the evening of August 20th, 1989, Lyle Menendez, 21, and Erik Menendez, 18, shotgunned their parents, Kitty and Jose Menendez, to death in their sprawling Beverly Hills mansion while they were innocently watching TV. But what you don't hear too often is the testimony of the boys regarding that crucial week leading up to this horrific night. The killing of Jose and Kitty Menendez did not happen in a vacuum, to say the least, because in the week leading up to the killings, the boys confessed to having a very life-changing altercation with Jose Menendez in particular, after Lyle found out from Erik that their dad was still essaying him regularly. Astonishingly, this is something Lyle had experienced himself and had been well aware was happening to Erik in their younger years. In fact, he actually confronted his dad about Erik, I believe when Lyle was around 12 years old or when Erik was around 12 years old, I can't remember which. But in any case, he confronted his dad about what he was doing to Erik when they were much younger. But the fact that it was still happening to an 18-year-old Erik came as a brutal shock to Lyle, who is now a 21-year-old Princeton student who lived outside of the home on campus in New Jersey. Can you imagine his horror learning that his 18-year-old brother, who idolized him and looked up to him and always ran to him for protection, was still being abused in this demonic way by their father, something he thought both of them had grown out of. You can watch a play-by-play of both brothers' perspective of the moment Erik confessed to Lyle in this video I made a while ago. The link will be in the description below. Suffice it to say, Lyle was totally thrown by learning what was still happening to Erik, that the father he had come to love in his own way and looked up to as an idol of sorts was still hurting his little brother this brutally. Again, the boys were extraordinarily close due to the nature of their upbringing and how they came to rely on one another throughout the physical, emotional, mental, and sexual abuse they sustained. So Lyle was under the impression that he was in Erik's strictest confidence for most things, right? But that didn't turn out to be the case. Erik, who was so humiliated and mortified by the fact that he was still, quote unquote, having sex with his father, when really he was being SA'd, he was so ashamed of this fact that he couldn't bring himself to tell anyone, least of all Lyle. He had decided instead to bide his time and simply looked forward to getting away like Lyle had to attend university. He had dreamed of moving across the country in Lyle's footsteps to attend Brown University in Rhode Island. However, when he was ready to start applying to college, his father Jose shattered his dreams one day by informing him he would not be moving away to college. He told Erik he would attend school locally at a far less prestigious institution, UCLA, and that he was expected to live at home while studying. In Erik's mind, This was a death sentence. His entire world, all of his hopes and dreams of finally leaving this hellhole and escaping his father's diabolical reach, were crushed in an instant. Following this twist of fate, he was ready to unalive himself. After years of avoiding this very last resort, he broke down after seeing his brother have a horrific fight with his mother and confided in Lyle that he was ready to end it all. And when Lyle found out why he was so depressed and contemplating harming himself, disaster struck. Lyle was infuriated and disgusted by what he'd been told, so much so that he put aside the trepidation he had of confronting his dreadful father and put protecting Erik at the forefront of his mind. He confronted Jose after he returned from a business trip and informed him that Erik would be coming to live with him in Princeton and that he was never going to lay a hand on his little brother again. This, of course, led to all hell breaking loose and a humiliated Jose Menendez vowing to end both of their lives. Knowing their father, the boys knew this threat was not only credible, but had a high probability of coming to fruition when they least expected it. They knew from past experience that when Jose Menendez said something, he meant it. They had watched him intimidate and terrify full-grown adults their entire lives, including their teachers and coaches. So surely they'd be no match for his biblical rage on their own. To underestimate what he was capable of would have been a grave mistake, and thus the case for self-defense was born. These two boys, now men, who had been terrorized and essayed and slapped around and demeaned their entire lives, made the decision to protect themselves from their sadistic parents, whose vitriol, hatred, and unlimited means and connections in Hollywood meant that they would have no problem ending the lives of their children at will. The fear expressed in that courtroom was real. It was corroborated by many witnesses for the defense, but also a few key witnesses to the prosecution, such as the captain of a boat that the boys and their parents rented for a shark fishing trip, who admitted, while on the stand for the prosecution against the brothers, how standoffish the boys were, and how despite the cold air and penetrating water, they chose to stay together at the front of the boat and were oddly separate from the parents throughout the entire hours-long trip. He noticed this strange tension among the family members, and that the boys would not come from the front of the boat to join the parents who were at the rear of the boat and beneath deck at times during the trip. They chose to stay and be drenched and huddled together at the front of the boat because little did the captain know they were fearing for their lives on that trip, which took place in the evening at an odd time for shark fishing. And in many such instances with parasite cases, their lifelong abuse leads them to a place of learned helplessness, where they believe their abusers to be omnipotent, and therefore believe they have no real way of escaping them, even with the help of law enforcement or other third parties. So many parasites remain and do the unthinkable. Erik and Lyle remained. When a horrible fight broke out one night and the father physically threatened Erik, they decided they had no choice but to act. According to psychiatric experts who evaluated the case and each of the guys, they put their emotional maturity around the time of the killings somewhere between 8 and 10 years old, as a result of the abuse they'd experienced that had basically stunted their development. And this makes perfect sense to me for so many reasons. The rationalization of killing your parents as your only means of escape is a very immature rationalization. Only someone irrationally fearful would have acted in this way. So it makes sense if you just think about them coming up with a plan to get the shotguns to protect themselves. It very much sounds like something two young boys would do, around 12 years old. They are completely lost. They had no credentials to get the guns, and they used a fake ID to achieve the purchase. It just sounds like something two lost young men would do because they don't have any other options. It's very immature thinking. This is also corroborated by the fact that Lyle was still playing with a large stuffed animal collection well into his late teen years, like around 17, 18, meaning as a senior in high school, Lyle still relied heavily on stuffed animals for comfort, and he was even kicked out of one of his high school classes for goofing around with a stuffed animal during class. This is in his school record. That is very telling about his mental state, not long before the time of the killings. So when you think of what they did that night, it just sounds to me like a very immature-minded abuse victim went to his older brother, who was not much more intellectually and emotionally mature, and they came up with a plot to protect themselves that was completely irrational, but they didn't know what else to do. They didn't know who else to turn to. You can also think about it in the sense that Erik was still being raped by his dad at 18 years old and was still under the impression that he couldn't leave the home or make his father stop. That speaks volumes. In their minds, even law enforcement couldn't help. And so parasites always make the decision to kill their parents because, as a result of their psychological makeup and other factors like insurmountable fear and hypervigilance and PTSD, these things lead them to do the unthinkable, the irrational. This is not difficult to understand. Again, 90% of parasites that play out in this way are the result of prolonged and severe abuse by the parents.
Kill himself, and I cried about that one for a while. And then we tell people, why don't you look at tell them that you were really worried about it? Eric, no, come on, look at him, tell your brother. Well, let him do this. He needs to do this. And you know what? This is part of your way of undoing what happened in your family. Erik needs to express his pain his way, and he needs to tell you how much he loves you and how concerned he was for you. But, Erik, can you turn towards Lyle and tell him what you feel? You can do it. Come on. You told me that between the two of you, if one of you was going to die, you'd rather you die and that Lyle left. Did you say that? Did you say that? Yes. Yeah. What do you think?
I think it's very obvious that Erik Menendez adores his brother and idolizes him and feels very guilty that through his going to Lyle for help, they've both been in jail for 3.5 years and maybe in jail the rest of their lives. This was the idolized big brother. And I think something else that you may have seen. When Lyle was testifying about his life, Erik was hysterical. At the council table, and it got real bad there at one point where we asked for a recess. When Erik was listening to Lyle talk about Lyle's suffering and Lyle's pain and Lyle's fear, Erik became completely hysterical. When Erik got on the witness stand and talked about his own, he didn't. And there seems to be a very special bond there where Erik cares in some way, I think, more for Lyle than he does for himself, which would, of course, be the family tradition.
I was in Israel playing tennis. I flew from Israel to London.
And then from London to?
Miami.
And from Miami to?
LA.
Now, did something happen? Did you hear something in Israel that caused you to make that flight?
Yes, I did. My roommate called me and told me that my brother had been arrested.
Did you understand what your brother was arrested for? You knew it was for killing your parents?
Yes.
Did you learn before you left Israel that allegations had been filed against your brother of special circumstances that made it a potential death penalty case?
Yes.
And how soon after hearing that your brother was arrested did you decide to leave Israel and come back to the United States?
Immediately.
And did you expect that when you came back, you would also be arrested?
Yes.
Did you ever consider during that period of time running away?
No.
Did you consider hiding?
No.
Did you consider fighting extradition from either Israel or England?
No, I didn't want to fight extradition.
Why?
Because I wanted to be back with my brother.
Erik confessed to the killings because it was weighing so heavily on his conscience. Right away, this proves he is not a psychopath. He feels empathy deeply and felt terrible for what he had done. Cold-blooded murderers do not have guilty consciences. Do you think Ted Bundy was going around weeping and crying because he had killed someone? No, he did so gleefully again and again and again, and would have never stopped if law enforcement hadn't stopped him. Erik was so overwhelmed with the guilt that he made himself physically and mentally mentally ill, hysterical, and finally confessed the killings to his therapist. Another major indicator of how sensitive and tender-hearted and honest Erik is that he flew home from Israel when he didn't have to, so that he could be with his brother in prison, knowing full well that they were facing the death penalty. Erik's confession and him flying home to face accountability and to be with his brother to face capital punishment shows what an upstanding human being he is and the amount of integrity he possesses, although it's hard to imagine with what he had done. But when you think of it in terms of him being a good person who was placed into a horrible position from birth and backed into a corner where he was driven to do something totally unthinkable, it makes perfect sense. What would drive a man this honest and this sensitive and with this much integrity to commit such a horrific crime? Well, the impetus must have been equally as horrific in measure.
What would happen to Erik when he got to the end of his lane at the end of the race?
Mr. Menendez would usually be waiting for him at the end of his lane, and Erik, I recall, was a pretty lanky and skinny young boy, and Mr. Menendez would basically pull him up with his thumbs in Erik's armpits and take him out of the water, and if he didn't like Erik's performance, he would not really aggressively, but kind of take him out and shake him and say, "You didn't swim fast enough. You didn't swim fast enough. You should be swimming harder." And I have vivid memories of that.
Would he do that even when Erik won sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, he would do it win, lose, or draw. I mean, yeah, he did that.
Do you ever see any other parents lift their children out of the water like that?
No, I would see parents kind of bring them out and hug the kids, whether they came in dead last or won the race. I'd see other parents hug and say, "Great race." And
did you ever see Mr. Menendez comfort Erik or congratulate him or say anything positive to him?
No, it was more humiliation in front of his competitors and teammates.
And his initial reaction was, nothing. And then I said, "You had to have copied this." And he began to cry.
Okay.
You say he began to cry.
Yes.
A few tears?
No, he really cried.
Okay. Was the crying that you saw unusual behavior for a 15 or 16-year-old ninth grader, even one who's just been confronted with a paper they copied?
I have rarely seen a boy of that age cry over anything.
The most compelling evidence of the abuse involves key witness testimony, medical records, disturbing photographs taken by the parents and found among their belongings, a letter written by Erik before the killings, which wasn't discovered until his cousin died, long after the boys had been convicted and sent away to prison, and also a recording of Lyle's ex-friend, Donovan Goodrow, admitting that Lyle told him about the abuse months before the killings. It's also important to note this audio is of Lyle's ex-friend, who Lyle had kicked out of his house in Princeton, and who therefore had no motive to do anything to help save Lyle, and who in fact lied about admitting that Lyle told him about the abuse on the stand in an effort to not assist the defense until he was confronted with audio from the interview where he admitted this. It's also important to note that Donovan was a prosecution witness, meaning he originally came to testify against Lyle and Erik, but this audio recording he had done with a journalist, Robert Rand, in which he was just being candid, ended up being exculpatory evidence on behalf of Lyle that was later subpoenaed by the judge to be played in court. This is just amazing evidence. The altering of the abuse evidence and testimony in the second trial to get the boys convicted was diabolical. In the 1993 trial, the overwhelming evidence of abuse was presented to the jury, not excusing, but explaining why the brothers did what they did, why they would have been so in fear of their lives that they killed their parents on August 20th, 1989. This evidence and testimony resulted in a hung jury, and would have done so every single time had a biased judge, who was notated as being openly biased against the defense by a juror in the first trial named Hazel Thornton, suppressed the abuse testimony in the second trial on behalf of the prosecution and got the boys convicted by a jury who were left in the dark about many of the critical facts regarding these boys' lives, which contributed to the parricide. This evidence was blocked by the biased judge in the guilt phase of the trial, but some of it was subsequently allowed in the penalty phase, which is what saved the brothers from receiving a sentence of capital punishment. They were instead given life in prison without the possibility of parole, which is utter horseshit. And it is reported by Robert Rand, who interviewed the jurors after the second trial, that many jurors insisted that had they heard all the abuse testimony that they heard in the penalty phase of the trial during the guilt phase of the trial, they would have never voted for first-degree murder, and the brothers might have walked free after a second hung jury and then a dismissal. Menudo was a Puerto Rican band best known for introducing Ricky Martin to the world. In 1989, Jose Menendez worked at RCA Records, where he managed the band and went on tour with them. In the early 90s, shortly after the Menendez killings took place, members from the Menudo band came forward and accused record label execs of essaying, drugging, and human trafficking them. They never named Jose Menendez specifically, and nothing else ever seemed to come from them publicizing these allegations. But a few years ago, when I first looked into this case, I predicted this would not be the last we heard word of the horrors these band members suffered under the likes of Jose Menendez. Then recently, this will be proven true when Roy Rosello, a Menudo member from 1983 through 1986, came forward in a documentary called Menendez plus Menudo, Boys Betrayed, and accused Jose Menendez of drugging and essaying him at his family home when Rosello was only 14 years old. This only confirms what we already knew about Jose Menendez from the testimony of his own sons, who killed him as a result of his diabolical abuse. You'll notice a pattern with Jose Menendez. He liked to sexualize and victimize young boys. He owned footage of a movie that depicted similar material, essentially CP, and then showed it to a neighbor who was also a friend and also Lyle's teacher, and she was appalled by it. He was also reported to have purchased a porn store and brought adult material home, and even made Lyle and Erik and young neighbors and friends watch violent porn when they were children. The band Menudo was also a pedo's wet dream, as the band had specific parameters that prevented its members from serving beyond the age of 16. Once they hit 16, they were kicked out of the band and replaced with someone new and much younger. I do hope more evidence emerges that helps convict Jose Menendez, even posthumously, for the horrible crimes he committed against so many, but in particular, his own sons.